Hello and welcome back. Thanks for joining. My name is Berit and today I want to talk about The Dark Forest by Cixin Liu. This is part 2 of the Remembrance of the Earth's Past trilogy. And the first part of that trilogy is the three-body problem. So this video will contain spoilers for the three-body problem. So if you haven't read it and or if you care for spoilers for that book, then please don't watch this video, because the first sentence about the content of this one will be a spoiler for the whole first book. So consider yourselves warned. So the Trisolarian fleet is on its way to Earth to pretty much wipe out humanity. And humanity has about 4 centuries left to come up with a kind of defense strategy. And the thing is that in the first book we already got to know that the Trisolarians also sent sophons to Earth, which are kind of small particles that shield off the entire Earth. And on the one hand, they can monitor everything that's going on. They hear and see everything. And on the other hand, they can also impede scientific advancement because of that, because they build like a shell around Earth, which prevents humans from advancing further in the sciences. And the thing is, as I said, the sophons monitor everything, but the one thing they cannot monitor are human thoughts. They cannot look or listen into our heads, and they also don't really get the idea of lying or deceiving, because the Trisolarians themselves, they can only communicate openly, so they don't really understand the concept of lying and bluffing. Anyway, humanity has to come up with a strategy against that and against pretty much certain doom. So on the one hand, they establish a space fleet, which consists of people from the Navy, the Air Force and regular soldiers or the regular military. And they have to start putting more resources and research into space travel because aliens and stuff. The United Nations also established the Project Wallfacer, which has 4 people that are chosen who are tasked with coming up with a plan against the whole Trisolarian invasion kind of thing. And since the Trisolarians can monitor everything we say and we write and etc., the idea is that the Wallfacers work for themselves and they cannot communicate with anybody openly about their plan, because the idea is that the plan is kept secret from the Trisolarians, which also means it has to be kept secret from humans, because everything they would tell them, the Trisolarians would hear. And the Wallfacers can use pretty much all the resources they need. They have all the freedoms. They have like legal immunity, because if it's part of the plan, they don't have to explain themselves about anything that they do. So 4 Wallfacers are chosen. 3 of them are kind of known people. 1 is a military strategist, 1 is the former president of Venezuela, and 1 is a known neuroscientist. And the 4th one is Luo, who is the protagonist of this book. He is an astronomer, I think, and he's not very known. He's pretty average, but he's also chosen to be a Wallfacer. And the thing is that nobody can really explain in detail why a certain person is chosen as a Wallfacer. The Wallfacers don't understand that either necessarily. At least Luo doesn't really understand it. And he also first refuses to be a Wallfacer, because he's like, well, no, there's no sense in appointing me that task, so But of course the Earth Trisolaris organization, which we have already met in the first book, they are kind of terrorists basically, and they are pro wiping out humanity. They come up with a counter plan against the Project Wallfacer, and they assign each Wallfacer a wall breaker. And the task of that wall breaker is to scrutinize everything the wall facer does to get behind what they really want to do, what the real plan is, and then to confront the wall facer with it and make the plan public so that it's kind of neutralized, because once everybody knows what the wall facer really wants to do, then the Trisolarans also know and they can counteract that. Luigi is the only one who does not get a wall breaker. First of all, because he refuses to be a wall facer in the beginning, and also because the ETO, or well, the Lord, the Trisolarans, they say that Luigi is his own wall breaker, which I found quite interesting. So he doesn't get a wall breaker of his own. And what we basically do in this book is that we follow the wall facers and the plans that they try to come up with, and also the military space fleet stuff, and we witness how humanity prepares for the doomsday battle with Trisolaris. Okay, that is all that I will say about the plot of this book. Now we get to the opinions part. The first thing I want to say is that I needed some time to get into the story. I thought the beginning dragged a bit, but eventually the story picked up and it was pretty cool. One thing that I thought was super interesting here was the overall question of what does the knowledge of, well, pretty certain doom does to the human society. How do humans react? How does society change in the face of more or less certain death? And we have, especially in the first half, a lot of discussions about two tendencies that evolve. One is defeatism, people who are very, very sure that humanity will die and will be wiped out. And the other one is escapism, which are the people that want to come up with a plan to save humanity in the way that humanity leaves the earth and settles somewhere else. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And also I thought it was interesting to follow the development of the wall facers and the question of what does this wall facer status do with the people who are wall facers, because that's no easy burden to have on your shoulders. And I also liked the plans of the wall facers. They were really interesting and cool and scary. And another detail that I liked is that each chapter here gives you the year when the plot that you're about, or the part of the plot that you're about to read, takes place, and they give you the time measured in which year in the crisis era this is. And I thought that was kind of interesting because you kind of get a feeling of how far into the catastrophe are we. And that was very, very cool. This book also scales up in comparison to book one. We now have the general theme of humanity preparing for doom, or preparing for what they call doomsday battle. And we have a lot more space stuff in this book. And the other aspect that I also found very interesting is that of hibernation, where some of the main characters go into a long sleep. So we also jump ahead quite a lot in time, which was very interesting, because before reading this, I was wondering how they would cross 400 years in the course of this trilogy, and hibernation is at least partly how they do it. And also, once they get into the future, that part of the story is really interesting. The description of the world is super intriguing, and it's very sci-fi in the last circa third of the book, which I enjoyed a lot. And as for book one, the last circa 100 pages were really thrilling to read, and I almost couldn't put the book down, which was really cool, especially because the beginning dragged a bit, at least for me. I also really liked the ending of this book. I won't say what it is, but it was different from other second parts in trilogies, because the ending was pretty satisfying, I think, and it wrapped up the story quite well. It also connected well to the beginning of this book, and I didn't have the feeling of, well, now the third part is missing. I actually think that this is a good round ending to this book, so it doesn't have this problem. I mean, it's not a problem, but it doesn't have this aspect of where in the second part you often feel, or I often feel, that in the beginning something is missing because we had the first part, and so the second part often begins somewhere where you would actually have to know the first part to read it. And then in the end of the second part you often have this feeling of, well, this story isn't over. And this actually wraps up quite well, but I still think that I'm still excited for part 3. So the ending does a pretty good job, I think, to wrap it up, but still you want to know what happens next, but you're also satisfied with the end of this one, which I didn't have in the first one. The first book ends with on a note where I was like, okay, now I really need to know how it's advancing, and I think this ending does a pretty good job in both keeping you interested for the third part, but also giving you closure for the second part, and I don't see that often in second parts. And also, of course, the sci-fi stuff is super interesting. Much like in the first part, I didn't understand everything. For example, the whole thing, and this is a minor spoiler, the whole thing where Luo Ji puts a spell on a star, I didn't really get it in the first place, especially not how this ties to his position as a messiah. I had to read about that part of the story afterwards because I was like, I'm not sure I understood this correctly. But I absolutely liked the sci-fi stuff again and the philosophical stuff again. So conceptual wise, this was again very good, although I will say I think I did like the first book better. Just the overall reading experience, I liked it more. But there was one thing that I didn't love about the book, and it is pretty much the same thing that I didn't love about the first book. And I feel like I want to delete my women's representation rant from the first book and insert it in this video, because on that front we're kind of going from bad to worse. And honestly, I have to say, I think the first book wasn't that bad in the end, at least not if I compare it to this one. Because at least we did have a very important female character. Here there are more female characters, but all of them are described as either surprisingly attractive, very slender, very fragile, and or childlike. And I also read that the translator already tuned down on this part of the story. Thank you for that, Joel Martinson. But I think the representation of women is actually much worse in this book, because that was much more sexist. I think, to be honest, in the first book I paid a lot of attention to women's representation because I was biased, or I was warned that the book would be sexist. So I was kind of paying more attention to it than I would have otherwise, I think. But in this book, believe me, you cannot not pay attention to that. It is too in your face. But I don't want to rant about this again, although there would be a lot that I could rant about in these 500 pages. But yeah, I kind of want to apologize for my rant in the first book, because I feel it was misplaced, because it belongs here much more than in the first book. Anyway, I think this will wrap up my thoughts on The Dark Forest. I'm excited for Death's End. I want to stress again, this book was very good. I did like the first one even better, The Three-Body Problem. I think that was just fantastic, apart from the women's stuff, but it was a fantastic book. And I would say that this was still a very, very good book, but I kind of enjoyed the first one better. And I also like the protagonist in the first one better than in this one. But I also feel that Luo Ji is not supposed to be the most likable character. So yeah, that's it from me today. If you've read the book, please let me know what you think. I would be very interested, because I still think that this is it's an interesting trilogy, and I am really looking forward to reading the third part and to seeing how everything wraps up. Let me know what you think about this one, and maybe I'll see you in the next video. Bye!